Hey, Quad folks. December 13th marks 11 years I've been into the head rebuilding work here at the shop. And about a year ago, on my 10th anniversary, I sat for an interview for a couple hours and explained how I got to where I am, wherever that is, and the journey, to get here. It's kind of a boring thing. You've been warned. So if you want to tune out, now's your chance. But for those of you that are truly interested in this type of work, it's sort of my story of how I got into the work and why I got into it, and a lot of information, I guess, if you're a young person and you've had maybe the same thoughts. I really hope that some of these videos that I've been putting out on the head work will inspire some young person in some way, to get interested in this and to do some of their own work around the world. Because I really believe that if this art or work of quad, as we call it, is to survive into the future, it's going to take that. Some young person somewhere, that's got the itch and wants to do it. So I really don't think commercial industries in the head business are going to really survive much longer. And we could debate about that, some other time, but it's always nice, like I say, to have a plan B. And so I hope some of the work I've done and continue to do, maybe you can draw some inspiration or at least a little information from some of the stuff that I've done that will help you in your work and on your journey. And just keep in mind, if an old dummy like me can do it, anybody can do it. So don't ever let anybody tell you otherwise. So let's give a look and a listen here to this old fool.
You got an anniversary coming up in December that you decided to get into the video head rebuilding.
Yeah, the 13th of December 2012. I guess is when I officially started. But actually it started years before that. Probably around 2006, 2007. I've been doing 2-inch transfer work since about March of 2004. And after you do something for a while, you sort of can see trends or can spot trends. And what I noticed early on was certain problems with certain tapes that I would encounter. You are easier to deal with if you have a head with tips of a certain height. At first it was height, the tip projection, but I started noticing that. And that all came from having a rather large collection or assortment of video heads to work with of varying stages of wear, you know, from brand new to worn out, all across the, you know, the range of wear. And I just kind of got to noticing that after a while, you know, certain tape problems I was able to easier deal with if I were to use a head with a certain tip height. And one thing leads to another, and you, after a while I started questioning, well, is that all there is, or is there something else to this? And so I bought myself a microscope and started looking at head tips. And I looked at a lot of them, trying to figure out if there was some correlation there. And, you know, it was more to do with the tip profile than the actual height or the projection of the tip that seemed to have the most effect on playing back a damaged tape or a tape with a problem. And so, you know, once I sort of realized that, I got to thinking about, well, how, you know, instead of just having an assortment of heads on the shelf that are kind of fixed, there's not anything that you can really, you know, change about them. What if I wanted to make a tip on purpose that has a certain profile or a contour for a specific sort of a problem? And so that got me thinking about, you know, how do you do this? And so I struggled along with that problem for a couple of years until it came back around 2008, 2009, along in there. Somebody forwarded me an email, or actually it was a string of emails, not just from one person, but from a bunch of people, on some of these VTR lists that had a big discussion going at that time about, you know, what, well, let's see, I think the title of the of the emails was the end of quad or the death of quad, and everybody was trying to figure out what next. What are we going to do? And so I read through all of that, you know, what other people were saying at that time. And, you know, I came from well, not just television work, but if you back up before that, I came from an engineering school background, a state, a VOTEC here locally that, you know, that had offered degrees in industrial arts, chemistry, electronics, instrumentation, machine tool. I came out of that academic background, you know, engineering, where, you know, you're trained to solve problems, not just talk about them, you know, and that's where you get the tools to do that, is that, you know, in higher education, in my case, engineering. And, you know, there's nothing that's been made that can't be remade. You just have to, you know, define your parameters in the area that you're wanting to work in and zero in on that one thing at a time. And so that's kind of what I did. You know, after that email was sent to me and I was made aware of, you know, what was going on in the world, then I kind of just zeroed in on that. And, you know, that sort of followed what I was leading up to anyway with my earlier work on the, you know, with the using various different types of heads to solve playback problems on problem tapes. And so I was kind of going in that direction already, although I wasn't really sure about the next step and the next step and so on. And thought, well, maybe there's a little more, you know, maybe a little more urgency to this than I had realized. Up until then, the fellow out at Head Tech, and up until that time, I think I'd been paying about $3,400 for a head rebuild, which was, you know, a reasonable amount. And it seemed like it was a little while later, maybe, I don't know, months or maybe a year or two. I lost track of time now, but anyway, the next time that came around, instead of it being $3,400, it was now $6,000. And that's a horse of a different color. You know, to put it that way. And my question in my mind at that time was, why the big jump in price? Why did it double from $3,400 to $6,000? So that kind of stuck in my brain, you know, that why did that jump that much? And so I just kind of vowed myself that I was going to find an answer to that problem. You know, things, usually you can't really, well, unless you're very highly organized, usually you can't just point at something and say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it this way, and this is how I'm going to do that. I've never been able to do that, you know. And this time around, it was no exception. So it took a few more years for this to come around. In a most, I guess, an unlikely or an unlikely sort of a way. And so I was kind of here by myself, you know, trying to educate myself. And what I was doing was I was going out on eBay and buying old clunker heads for $100, and sitting down with my little microscope and looking at all the pieces, dissecting the heads, taking them apart, and not just dissecting, but also making a journal, a list, a write-up of what I'm seeing. And so over a period of time, I'd taken a lot of heads apart and had a lot of notes. And at first, to make sense of what I was seeing in my notes, I started going out on the web to the patent office. A lot of that's in the public domain now, you know, prior work, patents. And that was my my source of reference that told me what I was looking at. I could look it up on a patent and learn quite a bit about why it was done, how it was done, who did it, you know, the people. And you get a lot of background in a patent, you know, if they're going for a broad, you know, description. And so that was all nice, good information that supplemented what I was doing, you know, here at home, you know, with my little microscope, looking at all these pieces. But anyway, I plodded on my own with the patents office online and the dissecting of the heads at home with the microscope. And you know, that you can really educate yourself a good deal on, you know, the physical attributes, the, you know, the mechanical aspects, and even some of the electrical things to a certain point, you know, depending on how much test equipment you have. And but when you get into the real nitty-gritty of the thing, which is the tip, you know, that's when it becomes a little bit of an obstacle. And you know, there was a fellow named Don Hart had educated me about that early on, about the hot pressing, hot isostatic pressing and sintering. And he had worked at Kennametal, so he knew all about metallurgy processes. And then I had a friend that had, he was a tool and die maker. He'd retired from Martin Aircraft and ITT, North Electric. And he was a machinist, tool and die maker, and he, you know, there's probably nothing that he hasn't done. Henry Barnett was his name, and so I had those guys, and well, and another friend, Clark Ellis. He was really helpful in the understanding more about EDM, electrical discharge machining, and some of the CAD applications where you would take a drawing or a Ruby Beam plot and turn it into a set of CAD files, you know, for automated control, machine control. So Clark was really good with that sort of technology, so he was able to educate me a little bit and help me on that front. So I had a pretty good working knowledge of what I needed to do, and so, you know, all the while still doing the 2-inch work and other things. The one thing that I really didn't have a lot of at that time was the money to do things with. And that kind of came about in another strange and unusual way.